This is the Aptitude Outdoors podcast, where we interview conservationists, hunters, anglers, and outdoorsmen and women to bring you the greatest stories, information, and advice from the best in the world.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Aptitude Outdoors podcast. Thanks for tuning back in. Now, on this podcast, I'm very lucky to talk to some really high-end professional people who hunt for a living, who fish for a living, and I really love fishing. If you listen to the podcast at all, you know I'm huge into fishing. Summer's rolling around here pretty quick. I'm going to be fishing a lot, and I wanted to condense some of the best tips that I've learned from some of the people that have been on this podcast from all across the country, professional fishermen, charter boat captains, TV show hosts, you name it. They have great information for you, and I wanted you to have it in a quick, easy way to access. So let's dive right into this episode. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. Hey, I love hunting, I love fishing, and I love America. And with the 4th of July right around the corner, Uncle Louie's Fireworks wants you to celebrate this holiday responsibly. Uncle Louie's Fireworks is one of the only stores in the area that sells subtle fireworks, which emit less noise but still put on a great show, so you can enjoy a fireworks display without alarming wildlife, sensitive pets, and people who are averse to loud noises. They also offer fireworks ignition systems that allow you to set off fireworks with your phone to assure you still have all those very valuable fingers come your favorite hunting and fishing seasons. Uncle Louie's Fireworks, located at 7300 Schnipke Drive, Ottawa Lake, Michigan, just off US 23 Exit 1, wishes you a safe and happy 4th of July.
There's a ton of education on bass fishing, and the pros are doing a great job of talking about stuff, but you got to listen to them. Like, there's little nuggets in there. I just changed to glass crankbait rods.
Okay.
Pretty limber, but stiff in the backbone. Kevin Van Dam came out with a line, and he said, this is the best crankbait rod, blah, blah, blah. He was a sales guy, biggest strike king, and he started listing why. First of all, the glass is slow, and you can just throw a mile. It just goes, wow. You can just bomb those crankbait. And the second thing is you can't feel them hit it. So you're just winding along, and then it gets heavy. You never feel any kind of bump in fishing mono, and you're reeling along, and then it gets heavy, and you're like, what? And then all of a sudden you go, got one. Well, he had all that time. He ate the bait, the rod gave, the mono stretched, he just turns on it. You don't even know he's got it. You wouldn't believe how many fish are hooked double across the mouth. And yesterday I'm fishing, I don't have one here, and I'm fishing a much faster rod. And I missed 3 on a crankbait yesterday, and I felt them hit it, but I was on them. Like, it was so quick. It's just dumb stuff like that.
Yeah, the 20%.
When I use those glass rods, I never feel, I'm winding along, and it gets heavy, and then they start pulling, and it's too late for them because they grabbed it, all that stretch, they just ate it, said no big deal. It's fighting. Like, they're used to things swimming around their mouth.
Yeah.
They turn on it, and then you're reeling, and I can't tell you how many I've caught with a crankbait that big and the lines coming out of their mouth because they got a chance to eat it.
Yeah.
It's dumb stuff like that.
Yeah.
As a general rule, advanced adult-sized fish should be released because fish in general will have more eggs, larger eggs, the larger the fish is.
Okay.
So those fish are more valuable to the environment. They're also, if it's a species like largemouth bass, the larger males are what guard the nest. So that ensures nest success. So the larger fish are more relevant, more important to the population. Whenever you harvest for consumption, you should harvest on the lower end, typically, of whatever the harvest regulation is. Because those fish, you'll have some variance. You'll have young fish that are exceptional growers. You'll have older fish that are poor growers, and they're all living in there, but they're competing for forage early in life. And if we remove those fish and consume those fish as our protein source, we will allow more juvenile forage items to grow up to feed the larger fish. And so we'll still have 2 tiers of that fishery, a harvestable fishery and a trophy or recreational fishery.
Pretend you're blindfolded. You're in you just get dropped off at a lake, freshwater lake. It could be anywhere in the United States. You have $100 bill, and the only place you could get outfitted to go is a Walmart. What's your plan of attack? You have $100. You're at a lake you've never been to before. What's your plan of attack? Where are you gonna what are you gonna do first thing right off the gate?
I'm at the Walmart, right?
You can look at the lake, then you can go to the Walmart. You can go to the Walmart, then you can look at the lake. Whatever you want to do. You're just in this scenario. Fake.
Simple. I'm going to buy one spinner rod, so a reel and a rod, braided line. It doesn't matter. I could bet mono line. That would save me some money. And I'm going to buy a jerk bait. I'm going to buy a Rapala X-Wrap. It looks like a bait fish. It wiggles, it rattles, it shakes. I've caught 15 different species on that one lure, from fresh to saltwater. I don't care where you are. That thing catches fish. So that's what I'm going to do. And I might buy a couple of them. And I'll probably buy a cheap pair of pliers if I don't have any tools with me. But other than that, I mean, I'm good. I'm golden. I can do that in under $100.
Yeah. And then when you get to the lake, what are you doing? What's your first plan of attack? You don't have a boat. You don't have anything. You're just there.
If I don't have a boat, I'll sneak, through people's backyards, and we're gonna make it happen. We're gonna catch some fish. We're gonna find some structure. We're gonna cast parallel. We're gonna cast around docks. We're gonna, go see if there's someone fishing and go and talk to them. Hey man, what you doing? Where you going? Or try to sound, hey, how's it going? I'm a real nice guy. You got space on your boat? Can we go fishing together? Try to be nice to people. Maybe they'll take you fishing. Or maybe if I have some change from the Walmart experience, be like, yo, bro, I got $20. Yeah, gas. Come on. We can even just troll the motor around the lake and you'll make $20.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm doing.
That's a sign of a true.
That's a great question, dude.
That's a sign of a true professional.
For instance, a couple years back, I had a client and his wife. We were in an area. We went into this one area. I knew the fish were there. We lined up in a ditch, basically, in a flat. They had to be laying in that ditch. On 7 casts, we caught 5 bass. A man was a little ways from us. He come over, fully rigged out boat, high-end stuff, big numbers. He said, what are you doing? I said, what do you mean? I got my guide name all over the side of the boat. He said, no, I mean, I've been in here all morning. I haven't caught any fish, and you come in here and make a few casts. And he said, the reason I'm asking that, because I'm with the Wounded Warriors, and I'm bringing some guys out here next week for the tournament. I said, well, in that case, line up here. This is what we're doing. This is the cadence with a rattle trap. Pretty simple. Just cover water quickly, right? So week went by. Another week went by. I had another client. We went back in there. There's that white boat again. So I turned around. I didn't want him to show him another spot. So I turned the boat around and started coming out. So as I'm coming out, the lady sits in the front console. She said, Captain, that guy's waving at you. I was thinking, what? So I wasn't paying attention. I'm running the boat. So I shut it off, put the power poles down. He comes up alongside and he said, hey, I really appreciate what you did for me last week ago. I said, well, what happened? He said, we caught 37 bass in here for the tournament. And I said, well, where'd you weigh them in at? He said, we weighed them in at X number place, which was probably 25 miles. So I was asking you earlier, will those fish ever come back? 25 miles is a long way. So I said, dude, you know what you did to me as a guide and somebody that lets the fish go in the area that lived there? You just took the whole herd out. For that kind of area, 2-3 acres in a flat, you can't take 40 fish out of there and take them out of there.
Yeah, Scooby, your tournaments are moving fish, traditional 5-fish, live weight.
I understand, that's where I'm
moving
going.
Fish. But it would be a fallacy for me to say that the removal of those fish ruined that spot.
Okay.
Because those 37 fish have been removed. Well, they only took 5 of them, most likely. So
no,
32 were culled throughout the day.
Well, if you had 2 guys, I don't know if that'd be about 10. Well, we have 8 in our area. You can do 8.
Yeah.
That's 16 for 2 days. That's 24.
Right. So a smaller portion of them. But usually, if there is an environmental characteristic that's holding fish, they remove those fish, other fish are going to fill that niche.
That makes me feel a lot better because I'm thinking, man, you just whacked me.
Yeah, exactly. So they're going to fill that niche very quickly because there was a reason those fish were there.
Yep. They live there. They love it there.
Right.
Yeah.
But once they're gone, then something else that was living on the periphery and was being pushed out by those fish can now replace them.
Move back in. Okay. That makes perfect sense. Okay. Appreciate you highlighting on that. Makes me feel a little better.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of studies on what we call stockpiling, which would be the removal of fish and displacement and then release in one location.
Okay.
And we don't really see stockpiling occurring to the effect that we would think it would with the number of fish being moved by tournaments.
Okay.
Which means those fish are displacing from their release location. Now, they typically travel about 1 mile initially, then they recover. And then, like we discussed, if they understand geographic markers, they could travel back to their home range.
Okay.
If they don't understand geographic markers, then they have to adapt to a new home range. But those aren't the only fish in the fishery. So you have replacement of those preferred areas.
Okay. And
How much time do you spend understanding fish habitat? I mean, you've been doing it your whole life, so it's probably a little different than someone like me who's learning in real time, but how important is that?
So I actually geek out on fish habitat because that's what I actually went to college for, was like wildlife management and stuff. And so that was like my driving force to going to college, was learning about primarily duck habitat, deer habitat, and fish habitat.
Yeah.
And habitat is, like you said, it could mean a whole lot of different stuff. So like in our farm ponds, I started building the brush shelters or whatever you want to call them, with like PEX pipe or whatever, and putting it in a bucket, filling it with concrete and throwing them out in the water.
Yep.
And that's fish habitat in the pond. Now in the lake, it could be riprap, rock piles. It could be brush, real trees falling in, whatever. And then it could also be like river channels where you're fishing that steep bank. And so I think learning how fish relate to each one is really important. And I'm still learning to do that. So like down here, we have a lot of creek and river channels and then flats, and fish, relate to everything a little bit differently. So if you've got a little rock pile on this flat, more than likely that's where the fish are going to be. And so you can fish the whole flat and not catch anything, but then you come up to this little rock pile and it's got 5 fish on it. And you're like, well, why weren't they out over here? Well, just because they feel safer next to something, instinctively they're still hiding from predators, or that's where their food's at. So the bigger fish like bass are going to be hunting the smaller fish and using that cover to hide and everything. So, habitat, I'm still learning all about it, of course. And I think that's where we connected really well, is that I continuously want to learn more and more. And I think that's the mark of a better outdoorsman than somebody who pretends to act like they know everything. Because like you said before we started, the expert more than likely only is expert in this one little tiny narrow thing. They know a lot about it, but if you get them out just a little bit of their comfort zone, they don't know that much. And so, even I've read a lot of from like Major League Fishing and Bassmaster stuff. They say, the expert guys that had this one technique going for them and they dominated for a while, they're not as good now. They've had to learn a broader spectrum of stuff. And so branching out to actually, learning techniques is great, but then branching out to where the fish are at is even better, and why they're there is even better. So what I'm learning now is how fish relate during specific times of the year. So you can go to the same body of water, and the pond, I'll use the ponds because I can go fish them anytime I want. And my ponds during the springtime, the fish are on the banks, they're relating to the banks, and you can catch the heck out of them. Summer moves around and it gets really hot like right now. And I've even got those brush piles out there close to the banks. The fish still aren't on those brush piles or on the banks 90% of the time. They're out in the middle where that water's a little bit deeper and cooler. Well, you translate that to a lake, it's the same thing. There's going to be more fish moving deeper and trying to find that cooler water instead of sweating to death. They don't sweat, but you get what I'm saying, being hot. And it's just figuring out where they are at that day, because sometimes they are really deep, and then you can go catch them really shallow even on hot days too. So it's like overwhelming to try to figure out exactly where they are. And even the pros, I mean, you look at the pros, they're still learning every single time they go to a new lake. It's something different, and it could be this looks the same as their home lake where they've always caught them this way at this time of year, but it fishes differently.
Yeah.
And so being willing to learn the habitat for your local lake I think it'll greatly increase your effectiveness in fishing.
It is scary to get into either activity. Fishing's a little more accessible, mostly in the upfront cost. Hunting can be pretty pricey,
Yes.
but fishing is definitely more accessible. Do you have any advice for women who want to dive into that?
I mean, I would say you really just have to go for it. I know that it's very intimidating, and I would say we were incredibly intimidated in the beginning. It's very overwhelming, and I think was part of the motivation for us starting our YouTube channel, was how overwhelming it can be, and how you can go into a tackle shop and someone can come up to you and say, do you want 1/4 ounce jigs or 1/8 ounce jigs? And then I'm over here thinking to myself, I don't even know what a jig is,
Yeah.
And a lot of fishermen don't realize that. You can't just say jig and a newbie didn't even know what that means. So I think the best thing to do is really just go for it. You have to kind of I would go into it knowing that some people are going to assume you know more than you do, because a lot of fishermen, I think, forget how much knowledge they've learned and how advanced their knowledge is, and that beginners don't always know those things and know those terms. So I would recommend to go for it. Definitely find a good shop that you can talk to people in and just tell them, like, hey, it's my first time. I don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And they can probably help you out.
Yeah, I feel that way when I go into a fishing store half the time.
It's just so weird how different tactics work different in different lakes. The other lake's a lot weedier, like the darker one. Like there's a lot more weeds to get hung up in, so you want like a bunch of weedless stuff. The other one's like clear sandy bottom. There's nothing to get caught on really. It's just crazy how different it is. So like I don't know. It's like you said earlier, so much to learn. But once you
gotta be able to adapt to the surroundings, and that only comes with experience, man. Like you got to put in the time. I mean, we talk about this about hunting and stuff, just how hard you've worked to figure out deer patterns and stuff, and being able to harvest an animal with your bow and stuff. And you might go out your first time and shoot something. Like our buddy Lou, he went out and seen deer the first time he went out and thought he was the king of it until he missed.
Yeah.
So, hope you don't hear that. But you got to put in your time to get good at anything, and fishing is no different, and I've had the luck of hanging out with Kanyan Klein a few times down here at the Bass Brigade camp and stuff, and just him, I remember watching him on TV when I was younger, and reading BASS magazine, Bass magazine, and stuff, articles that he was in, and getting to talk to him one-on-one. And he is so intuitive and in tune with these fish all across the United States. He can go anywhere in the world and figure out the fishery probably within a day, and be able to go out and have really good success. And that just doesn't come easy. I mean, he's put in a lot of years, and all these guys fishing the pro circuits now, man. I mean, that's all they're doing, going around fishing these tournaments and stuff and learning these lakes and different techniques. And they've got to adapt on the fly, because they might go and pre-fish a lake and then come back the next week for the tournament, and it's rained 3 inches and turns everything on its head, and then what are you going to do? Like, your whole game plan's out, so they gotta be able to change. And that's why, it's cool now to have so many options as far as lures and different techniques and stuff like that. 'Cause you can adapt a lot quicker now than just having 4 or 5 basic types of lures to play with. These guys are tweaking the bills and the split rings just so the lure will run just a little bit different. And it's like, dude, I couldn't do that.
Yeah, I just love to fish every species. I consider myself, and I try to strive to be an all-around angler. I love to fly fish. I was in the West. I went to college in Colorado and bounced around the West for 10 years before South Dakota, or I guess not quite 10 years, but a while before South Dakota, and then moving back to Illinois here. And so I love to fly fish. I fish for muskie, all kinds of stuff. But in my mind, you have to be an all-around angler and be able to use different tactics for the species you're fishing for. And smallmouth in particular, I love them because they're just pretty, man. They're pretty fish.
Yeah.
They are underrated pretty, I think. They have like, kind of, not spots, but like the dark markings on the side with the green colors, and they can change depending on what body of water they're in, how clear. I'm sure the ones around Lake Erie are like, like at least at Lake Michigan here, they're like almost iridescent. And then if you get them in some of the rivers, they're real dark. So I love that. But I love the way they live in rivers and lakes, and they're fighters, man. They're pound for pound, they don't get massive, but, if you get like, anywhere from like a 15 to a 20-inch smallmouth, like you're in for a ride. It's going to be jumping. It's like, they're the best. And then, it's a strong fight. So they'll jump, they'll run. And then I love fishing topwater. I mean, topwater fishing for smallmouth is like, doesn't get much better than watching a fish just explode on the surface and just crush something,
If you look on the internet, you really can't trust anything what the internet says, and you don't know if it's true or not. It could be, but 100% you don't know. And so I think my advice would be just do it yourself. Go out there, try it for yourself, and kind of make your own thoughts and opinions about it instead of trying to listen to what someone says or look up videos or, just kind of do it on your own.
Hold on. I've got to interject because I'm smiling inside right now.
Yeah.
Because I'm so close to her dad. We own a company together. We travel together, and people ask him this question all the time. It's a similar question to what you just asked. And his answer every single time is, for every angler out there, there's no right way, there's no wrong way, there's only your way. And he says it that exact way every time. And that's what I just heard from Kanyan.
It's true. I mean, every single angler, every single person has their own way of doing it. So if I tell you something, it might not work for you. So I strongly believe that every person has to do their own thing and kind of figure it out on their way.
A lot of people, especially with television in the past, I mean, growing up, it's like everybody's catching monsters all the time. They're getting the biggest deer, the biggest fish. And like, I think that over time that gets discouraging for a lot of people because they're like, well, I never catch anything like that. What the heck's going on? So, I mean, I think your show brings that a really good energy with enthusiasm, but it also is like, you're realistic. You're showing people how to do things instead of being like, I'm the best fisherman ever. I only catch 12-pound bass, which you do catch big giant bass. But you know what I'm saying? So like, where did that ethic come from? Because not everybody has that.
Listen, to me, I literally just posted this on Instagram, this exact phrase. Every fish is a good fish. Some are just bigger than others. We have an episode coming out next weekend. For those who are going, whenever this comes out, we have an episode coming out about Slidell, Louisiana, where we're catching Jack Crevalle. The entire episode is dedicated to catching Jack Crevalle. And in the narration, I talk about how people consider jacks a trash fish. No. This thing, dude, these fish, they were blowing up our lures. We were throwing giant tuna plugs at these fish using 100-pound braid, 150-pound leader, and we still broke off. You can't tell me that's a trash fish. You can't do that and think that's a trash fish. And dude, I've been up in the mountains catching brookie the size of lures I'll throw at redfish or at tarpon, and was just as excited. If I ever, I've said this a few times, if I ever lose that passion or that excitement to catch fish, I don't know what I'll do. I've joked and said I'll take up golf, but I hate golf. I'm terrible at golf. I'm too much of a control freak, and I hit the ball and it goes way out to the right. I'm like, come on, it makes no sense. But I just love catching fish. I don't care. Like, we were filming the other day, and we caught a bunch of bluefish, and they weren't our target. I didn't care. They were fun. They were a blast. And that's just my dad and I. That's how he raised me. We just went fishing, and it wasn't about catching monsters. It was about spending time together. It's about being outside.
You have to hit stuff with crankbaits. You got to hit the grass. You got to hit mud. You got to hit rocks.
Okay.
You start deflecting them, it's going to get legit. Like in early spring, I fish one lake that has a lot of grass. Mm-hmm. And the pros will set up 5 or 6 fishing rods with different line. So you may be throwing a Rapala DT6. You're in 10 feet of water with 4 feet of grass. So you got 6 feet of water, and the top of the grass is 6 feet deep. They'll have 10, 15, and 17 on reels. Same lure.
Okay.
On 10, it runs 6 feet. On 12, it runs 5.5 feet. On 6, you're buried in the grass. Mm-hmm. So they grab 12, and it goes right across, and you feel it going on top of the grass. And then you can fish. But if it buries in the grass, you get grass, and you're inefficient. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you got to throw 17 to bring the lure up, and for some reason they just want it right off the top of the grass. I've done it. It's the most ridiculous thing in the world to throw the same exact lure on a different mono.
Same rods?
All same rods. I've got 4 of those crankbait rods. Mm-hmm. I usually do 10 and 14, and then I adjust my rod angle. So if I'm burying in the grass, the first thing I do is pick the rod up and try to figure out how to just feel it. And you'll feel it go ticking the top of the grass. Mm-hmm. And then they just come out of the grass and smoke it. And if you fish this far above the grass or 6 inches above the grass,
they don't want it.
It's not bouncing off the grass. It's not deflecting. It's not weird. It's just, they're like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, whatever.
That's boring. Right when it hits the grass, it's jump. Sometimes you'll hang up and you pop it. And right when it comes out of the grass, they're like looking at it and they go, yeah, and they just smash it.
Yeah, they're predatory.
And if you have clean water, if you have rock, hit the rocks. If it's 10 feet deep, you need a DT 15. Mm-hmm. And you're going to lose baits.
Well, that's part of fishing.
Right. A glass rod on rock and reeling moderately slow. When you hit something, you learn to feel that and you stop and it'll float up and then you can just keep going.
But that's the best thing we use for a weenie is just a standard bar S weenie that you buy in the dollar store. I cut them up down the middle and I cut them on both sides and I put them in coffee. I'll take them and actually put them in the what is that, Folgers can, and I'll put my coffee grounds from that morning when I have coffee before I go out. I put it in there, shake it up, and that is my weenie with coffee, and that will catch them catfish like that. I don't have to do anything else.
No kidding.
Sounds like my breakfast too. That really not that different.
They just want to smell something. So when we ever clean the catfish, they're full of slime and green stuff off that tree. It's like they don't want something that really smells good. They want muck that they're eating off that tree.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I mean, I don't know if they're algae. That's what they're eating on right now. I don't see shad in them. I don't see crawfish in them. It's just goo.
Is that why they taste so good?
It's only blackened. No, they're all good. So, but if I can have a kid have a good time with it, that's what it's all about for me. So if he can go watch that bobber for 3 seconds and it goes under, that pulls my trigger right there.
I watch a lot of YouTube videos and stuff about just, better tactics, better ways to fish, better baits to use. And there's so many options on the market for things. I mean, there's chatterbaits, there's 1,001 soft plastics, then you got crankbaits. There's just anything under the sun you can think of. And one of my biggest downfalls, I guess, is if I'm not catching them immediately, I'm switching lures every 5 seconds, trying to get something to happen. So if you had basics, back to the basics, if you had to if you were going bass fishing, you had 30 seconds to grab a few things, what would you throw in your tackle box for running out the door?
So I'm a huge power fisherman. So it's going to be a crankbait, a spinnerbait, or a chatterbait is going to be my go-to lure. But then I also catch a ton of bass on just a Cinco. And my favorite way to rig it is wacky rig. I just seem like I get more bites that way. And of course, like you said, I love catching big fish, but I'm kind of like you. If I'm not getting a bite, I don't care if they are little 6 inches or whatever. I still want to catch something. Uh-huh. So I think that wacky rig is one of the best ways just to get a bite. And that's going to be my go-to starting things, throughout the years, like you, I've looked into more advanced tactics or whatever, and it hasn't yielded me as great as results as what, and I'm not an expert in those either. So that's probably why, but my beginner go-to stuff was like a crankbait or a chatterbait, because they're just, you cast it out there, and as long as you're making contact with something, it's going to work. And even if you're not making contact, sometimes you'll get a bite. And then a wacky rig, you cast it out there and let it float down and pop it a little bit and reel it back in, and it's super easy to fish as well. And that's kind of my go-tos.
Is it true that because fish don't have eyelids when it's bright out, they go to deeper water? Or is that also a myth?
That's a myth. Yeah, that's a myth. They don't have eyelids, but sunlight doesn't affect their eye in the way that, like, if we look at the sun, we get blinded. It's not going to affect their eye in that same way because of how it refracts through the water. Now, they will change color based on depth in sunlight. The shallower they are, the clearer the water is, the more sunlight, they'll get darker in color. So we do see some of those, physical changes, but it doesn't hurt their eyes. No.
That's funny. That's hilarious. I read that in like an in-fisherman book.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, they will prefer shade, but once again, that's more of a evolutionary tactic to where they're trying to hide in a shade line and ambush prey.
Okay.
Rather than, they're trying to escape sunlight.
It's cool that you get to fish all over and do cool stuff, but like we're in Florida, what would you say is some of like the most accessible fishing? Like someone like me, I go to Florida probably every couple of years. Maybe the last 2 years I've been down twice in like Fort Myers area. And the first thing I'm doing is looking up charter boats. It's like where I can go fish. What would you say is like the most accessible fish for like someone like me who wants to just come down for 5 days and fish?
I mean, that's a tough question because it depends a lot on what you want to target. Mm-hmm. But if
something you can eat.
Yeah, if you want to eat something, I mean, if you're looking for the most variety of species, I would definitely say somewhere in the Florida Keys, which is why we've done so much filming down there, because you can go offshore and catch mahi, tuna, wahoo, sailfish. You can come in a little bit shallower, fish the reef, catch yellowtail snapper, mutton snapper, groupers. Then you can go even shallower and do inshore. You can catch tarpon, trout, snook, mangrove snappers, permit. I mean, the variety is literally insane. And if you did want to do a trip like that, I would recommend booking several charters. You do an offshore day, you do a reef day, you do an inshore day. So there's a lot of options for what you wanted to catch, especially if you're trying to do saltwater fishing.
What about the umbrella rig?
It's effective, very effective.
They're terrifyingly good.
Alabama rig, they're very effective.
The funny thing about the Alabama rig is all the stealthy stuff, got to throw fluorocarbon, they can't see the line, and then you throw the umbrella rig, and you're basically dragging chains through the water. And you can pull a truck out with it, and it's fine. Everybody's good with throwing the umbrella rig, but you got to get stealthy. You got to throw the fluorocarbon, or they're going to see it. Except I'm going to throw the umbrella rig, the umbrella rig fascinates me.
Yeah, whenever you're fishing pre-spawn largemouth bass that are suspended, it's very effective. I mean, to the point where a lot of professional leagues, Major League Fishing on our Bass Pro Tour, it's not a legal lure to use.
Why did they do that? Just because it works, or is it because they don't want you catching 5 at a time?
A little bit of both.
Can you politically tell us?
It's not
can
because
you
it works.
Not be politically correct and just tell us what the BS is, everybody? You got to be on the inside.
I can be non-political, yeah.
I'm just messing with you, man.
No, it doesn't matter. No, the truth is because of the amount of hooks that were not within the fish's mouth. So you would have a lot of fish that were not hooked legally.
I didn't ever think of that.
Yeah, so it becomes a point where...
just swipe at one and get hooked in the head.
Exactly, or 4 or 5, and so you get 2 that are not hooked.
Oh, wow. So it's like bait fishing, you got to hook them in the mouth.
Right,
but
whenever we look at it, it's an effective method to catch fish, and they are physically trying to bite the lure, but as an aesthetic purpose on television, that's not a great look.
That is something I never thought about. I still get a kick out of all the wires and stuff. It's totally counterintuitive.
If you've never tried it, it's extremely effective for crappie. What you're seeing a lot of the shore lunkers caught at OHIV right now, they're using the forward-facing sonar, and they're vertically jigging an Alabama rig over the top of a cedar tree and getting those fish to come up. A lot of those guys will get the fish to come up and then reel that in and drop a single swim bait down to actually hook the fish. But it's an effective method when you have suspended
No, they're
fish.
using it like a marlin teaser.
Almost, yeah.
You could even cut the hooks off just to get them to jump, to pop.
Exactly. I mean, you get the fish to engage. And then
I've got 2 in my tackle box, but they wear me out in about 10 casts.
Oh, they wear everybody out. It doesn't even matter if you have the right gear. It's a lot of work.
What is your favorite like soft plastic method to fish with? I mean, we can just say bass to begin with because that's like the most common that the most people are going to relate to.
Yeah, I mean, Texas rig worm is the easiest thing to start out with, and easiest to fish probably. But I really like Carolina rigs, probably the best. Whether it's a worm or a lizard or I don't even know. It's been so long since I've bought stuff to fish for that, but grubs, any kind of soft plastic that looks like that. Down here, usually trying to imitate crawfish or something along those patterns and stuff. But just like for instance, at the summit, I mean, I was throwing a Carolina rig, and I caught several really nice bass on that, man. And I like the Carolina rig because usually your weight and stuff is up ahead of your lure. So you have, 12 to 18 inches of line, fluorocarbon, up to your worm and hook. And so when you're moving that lure, the weight might be down here and your lure is still kind of floating up off the bottom, slowly going down. And that's, I mean, to me, when you're fishing in a little bit deeper water, that is the ticket, because those fish, everyone I caught, man, they just annihilated that bait. And it's a little bit harder fishing that way from the shoreline because it's easier to fish vertically that way. But that was always my favorite technique and stuff. The drop shotting and all that kind of started right when I was moving down here to Texas and kind of got out of the bass fishing scene per se. But I've done a little bit of that. But man, now, I mean, everybody's got boats and stuff down here. Like, it's all about the live scope and stuff. I mean, you're basically seeing these fish before you ever catch them, and picking out which one you want to catch. That's why this year down here, bass fishing wise, in my opinion, it's probably been the most large fish over 13 pounds probably ever caught in the state. And all these guys are using, and I got nothing wrong against it. So, going out and using the live scope and these Panoptics, cameras on their fish finders, to look at these. And it's basically like an ultrasound in the water. You go up and you can tell. I've done it a couple times and you can discern the different species, if it's a bass or crappie or catfish or whatever. And you can literally watch your lure go down and put it right on their nose and try to get them to eat. And, it's crazy, man. I would have love to have that when I was younger, man. Those crappie wouldn't have stood a chance.
And I think that's the best thing about fishing different ways. Like, most of the time, I'm probably like 80% spin fishing now, just because what I'm doing, where I'm at and the rivers I'm fishing. But it's all about learning. It's like, in order to get better, you can't be afraid to be like, hey, I suck at fly fishing, but my buddies and I are going to go up and we're going to learn and try and figure it out, and that's the only way you get better. And I've found at least that the more humble you are in saying how much you suck at something, or like how much of a beginner you are, the more people are willing to help and show you too, rather than like pretending that you're like this expert fly fisherman. It's like, no, we're just kind of picking this up and we're having a great time and we're trying to learn what we can. And that's the only way that you can pick it up and get better with things, right?
When you think about a trip you're doing, or when you think about the water you're going to be fishing, whether it be saltwater, freshwater, how much just is internalized now? Like, I think this time of year, this temperature, this wind, the fish are going to probably be over here in this scenario. How much of that is internalized, and how much of that do you sit down and like look at the map and be like, all right, I gotta do this today? Or do you ever have to kind of check yourself and like look through a book again? Like, what should I do in this scenario? Like, that's where I'm at now is like, when do you kind of internalize this and when is it a continuous research in your, like, for life, you know?
Well, it's very funny that these fish tend to do and be in the same places year after year. It's just crazy. The only thing that changes is when will they be there? So going back to the show, it's called the captain's log. So keeping a journal of your fishing trips, whether that be through photos or some notes on your phone or really processing or writing down an actual journal, like those notes can be huge for you because then you can go back and go, all right, what were the conditions this day? Man, there's a front coming. In fact, there's a front coming. What day is it? It's Wednesday. There's a front coming here Friday. So we're 2 days out. Well, a month ago, 2 days prior to the cold front, was some of the best fishing we've had in a long time. So my brain is already thinking, okay, I got the same conditions that I had a month ago. We're going to have a south wind tomorrow. We got a cold front coming in 2 days. I bet you those fish are going to be the same place that they were a month ago. But being a guide for 7 years, being on the water every single day for 7 years, I don't have to look back as much because I just remember. You know, when I was in high school, I'd have coaches talk about football games, and they'd say, "Oh, remember we were playing this place and we had this happen." I'm like, how do you remember all that? It never made sense to me. It's because I didn't care as much about it as I do the fishing. But when I get out on the water, I start remembering these things. Oh, I caught a fish there. I remember what happened there. I remember exactly who I was with, when it happened. I remember the weather. I remember what I used. So there's a saying, my dad says it all the time, and I'm going to mess it up. But the worst ink is still better than the best memory, right? Mm-hmm. So writing things down on having a journal and having pictures is going to not only help you, it's going to it's just a secondary piece of help when you're out on the water to your brain stuff. I have a GPS on my boat, mainly I look at it. I had a guy the other day. He's like, "Oh man, are you using this to find fish?" Like, no, I use it for my clock. There's a clock on it, and I look at the water temperature because I'm curious, and that's pretty much all I use it for. Because I've spent so much time out there, I know where I'm going. I don't need, the only thing that moves around is the manatees, and that you can't see anyways until they freak out and you run into them anyways.
Yeah.
But other than that, dude, it's just time and experience.
Another thing is on crankbaits, KVD triple grips. Change out every crankbait you've got, cut all the treble hooks off, unless they're triple grips. Okay. Those things are so evil.
Sharp.
They're bent in. Kevin Van Dam, I read an article about him I found in some obscure ass place against 20% boy here. I kept shaking fish off on crankbaits. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to figure out why. The glass rod was one. And then the second thing was he designed the trebles are bent in. So normal trebles are straight up 90 degrees. Mm-hmm. He had them bent in a little bit. And people think, hey, that makes it lock better. No, it's hook flex. He said he realized he was losing fish because the hooks were at a perfectly straight up. The fish would hit it and it would tilt out and tear out.
Okay.
So he tilted them in and they tilt to straight and they drive. That's why they're bent.
That makes sense.
On top of that, it locks them. But he didn't do it to lock them. Hackney built a jig and put a tuna hook in it for jerking them on 65-pound braid. Mm-hmm. And he said the same thing. I had to put a bigger hook in my jig because I was looking in their mouth and I saw the tear where the previous hook would flex open, skip down their face and bury. Well, I was skipping, he said, I was jacking them, like on a heavy broomstick and 65 trying to get them out of the grass. And he said the lure would come back. Mm-hmm. He said they're knocking the slack out of it and bending the rod. They didn't miss.
Yeah.
And he realized that the hook was opening up because he had so much leverage. So we put a tuna hook on it. And he said, now that thing is so stout, it just drives.
Your larger bluegill are males. and especially up north, catching panfish and consuming them is still fairly popular. So you will have cycles of those males move shallow to spawn, they become more vulnerable to angler harvest, and we see that. You'll also see it in size classes, as in, a certain percentage of fish are going to die out of age every single year. So you're going to see those cycles occur. Most likely what you're seeing is the stage of bluegill reproduction. Those males, the bigger bluegill, will be offshore. They will be around some sort of habitat. They'll be stationary. And then when it becomes time to spawn, they'll move as a school into an area and spawn. And then if you're not following that movement, you could miss those fish completely, where 2 weeks later, you're sitting in that same spot fishing and they've moved up and it's much easier to catch them. So I think it's probably more cyclic and seasonal.
What's something to look for in a guide service? Because I've had some where it's been like, this is great, I'm having a great time. And I've had some where like, this sucks. Like, I don't know. Is it all personality, or is there certain things you want to look for? Or?
I've had some really bad experiences with guides that really turned me off to never wanting to go out with a guide again.
Same.
Especially the first two I ever went on. One was a freshwater trip, and one was a trip over in Florida. And I called and talked to, the first guide I never talked to, it was through a buddy of mine, but it was up on Lake Fork, which is like the mega bass capital of the world in Texas back then, and not so much now, but still a really great lake. And we go, and this guy, all he wanted to do is go sight fish for bass. And my buddy just wanted to catch fish. It was his birthday present, and his mom bought him, and he took me with him. And the whole time, we're in the back of the boat. He's up on the front, on the trolling motor. We're stuck in the back and in the middle. And I was just like, this just doesn't feel right. It's like he's not like trying to show us anything. And I'm nice. I'm not saying anything to the guy. I'm sitting there watching the depth finder, and I see we're going over these drop offs, and I'm like, I'm starting to fish while we're moving, and I catch like a 5-pounder. And he never even stopped. He never even got off the trolling motor. Didn't even acknowledge I had the fish on. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. And so at that point, I was pretty much done. But my biggest piece of advice to somebody looking for a good charter guide, like you can go and look on Google and look at reviews and all that stuff. Well, you can buy a lot of that crap. Most people pay to put their name up there. So don't always go by that. Call the guide. Talk to them, tell them what you're wanting. A good guide's going to ask you, what are your goals for the trip? What do you want to get out of this? And I always ask people that. And some of them, they don't know. Like, they've never done anything like that. They just got their family. They want to take their kids out fishing. I say, that's great. Those are the best trips, in my opinion. And then you have some people that's like, hey, I'd like to target this species. Oh, okay. Well, now I know. So I can start planning on that time of year, and giving you some ideas. This is what we're going to be doing. We might go fish over here in the bay for a little bit and then run offshore or something like that. And, but I like when people call and ask me about that. And so it helps me deliver a better experience for them on the end result, and have them have a good time and want to come back again. That's my goal, is to have repeats, have people come back. And I have a lot of that. Probably 70% of my business are repeat clients. And then the rest are word of mouth, referrals and stuff like that. So, but that's the number one advice I can give to people is call and talk to the guide. If they don't answer, you understand they're up all day, and they're maybe fishing every day when they're doing it full time. Don't call them the week before. You need to try to plan your trips a month at least out and give them, get time to get them. I mean, some of the guys I have, they book me a year ahead of time. Yeah. And so I'll put that on the schedule. And I know a lot of my friends that fish, especially a lot of the guys I know down in Florida, they're booked out a year. Like, you can't even get a trip within a year from them. They're so full because so many people want to fish with them and stuff. And that's because they take care of their clients, and they go on a trip, they book that same weekend the next year. Yep. So if you see a guy that's got a lot of trips booked, he's probably a pretty good, reputable person. I don't know. I just love hanging out with families and making memories with people on the water. So I hope that most people think the same after they go with me. So.
And one thing at a Jig and Pig, what y'all do with Gary and all, I'll throw that Jig and Pig out there and watch it fall. We're going way too fast. You watch that jig go, like a kangaroo, I'm thinking, whoa, I'm going way too fast. So that's why I'm catching more fish on our fly rods, because we can't fish deep and we can't fish fast. So we pick up more fish on a fly rod for that reason. Now I understand that when that Jig and Pig, if I can just get him to hop 4 or 5 inches and crawl, that looks more real than a and that's why I'm feeling out the mood of the fish was forward-facing sonar for me. Does that
Hey,
make
one
any
last
sense?
time, can you demonstrate how you wiggle your weenie?
Very carefully.
I don't know if we want that.
I can show you.
You were my first.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on gear specifically? Like, do you think it matters overall, not in certain aspects, like better gear ratios or whatever? Like, I'm talking like, if you want to fish, do you need expensive gear?
So I have to be honest, but my wife's in the background listening. So I'm about to shoot myself in the foot here. But I really don't think that, like, I think people make more out of gear than it really is. You know, like me, I'm a sucker for the newest, latest, greatest stuff as much as anybody. You know, I want the latest, greatest, best thing, but I can take it out there and I can get skunked every single time. You know, like, it's not making me a better fisherman by going out and buying more expensive gear. Where I grew up and we weren't poor, but we didn't have a lot of money, you know, middle class kind of average people. And my favorite fishing pole was an ugly stick that actually had the tip broke off for a while. And for whatever reason, I loved fishing with this fishing pole growing up, and I caught a lot of fish with it. But, you know, it was really a piece of junk. I mean, it was a broken fishing pole, and I was still able to catch fish with it. Now, granted, if I had the $400 fishing pole, you know, latest, greatest, would I have caught more fish? I doubt it, but maybe.
Yeah.
It's just, I do think that we get caught up in, you know, consumerism of having the next, latest, greatest stuff, where even in some of my videos and articles, I'll write that, you know, we get caught up in, oh, what's the best rod and reel combo do you throw with this? And I'm like, whichever one you got. Like, I'm not going to tell you go out and buy a brand new rod and reel just because, you know, somebody else told me to say that. Like, it's like, I've got my rods and reels that I like and I use, and I throw everything on it. You know, I don't have a huge collection of rod and reels, although of course I wish I did, but I don't. So, I mean, it all works. Is it the best option for it? Maybe not, but it still catches fish.
I'm obsessive compulsive about changing line all the time, making sure that my line's fresh. I probably change line 5 or 6 times a year. I strip off 50 yards, tie a uni to uni, and then top it. Bass aren't going to take 40 yards of drag. I wouldn't do that in saltwater, because you'll hook a big bull redfish, you'll strip it to the knot and break you off because you didn't change that bottom part for 3 years. It'll just go kaboom. Right, but on bass, I usually take it and throw it as far as I can, and I strip off 10 yards and cut it. And then I put brand new line on top of that.
Okay. Whenever you have a black bass, whether it's smallmouth or largemouth bass or whatever, there's actually between 13 and 19 species of black bass. But smallmouth, spot, and largemouth are the ones we most often catch. Whenever you have them, whatever geographics they are within the United States kind of dictates their lifespan and their maximum growth and the growth rate in which they have. So as general rules, a fish in the southern United States has a shorter life, but will grow to a larger size.
Makes sense.
Okay, so its metabolism works a little faster, its growth rate is more every single year, but that shortens its life. Now, when I go up north, they grow at a slower rate, and they typically have a longer lifespan. So the fish you're trying to catch, at 12 inches, those fish really could be 5-6-year-old fish. Where here, a 5 to 6-year-old fish probably has a weight of 2.5 to 3 pounds and a length somewhere around 16 inches. So there's a big variability in that. The fact that here they have to be a little more aggressive because they have to keep up with that growth rate, competition, all those things. Where up north, they can have a slower lifespan. They don't have to be as aggressive. You key on what is the difference between this lake and that lake? In the variability in habitat fertility, so color and clarity, the food chain, competition, harvest rate, all those things combine to give you an expression of like, what do the fish look like? So if you have fish that are most often 12 inches, we would call that a stunted fish population. To me, that means the water is probably extremely clear, or on the other end of that scale would be super turbid, muddy. In Michigan, I would guess pretty clear.
Yeah.
Probably fairly vegetation rich, where we have a lot of aquatic plants. And whenever you have clear water and a lot of aquatic plants, you usually have a lower abundance of forage. Now, the forage could simply be the issue in the fact that one of those reservoirs could have a thriving yellow perch population and the other one doesn't. Or, bluegill sunfish, kind of same thing. Like, it depends on the forage that's available. A lot of those fisheries have crawfish as one of the main forage items, and the crayfish are just really poor nutrient level for bass, so they don't get a lot of growth from them. But we have to take all those components to understand exactly what the fishery can produce. So every fishery has a carrying capacity, and you've just identified two. Maybe they're similar size. Well, you said one was smaller, but their carrying capacity is very different.
Like, what's the most affordable option for someone to come fish? Would it be like inland fishing, or like, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of great options. If you did want to fish the Keys and still fish saltwater, there's plenty of head boats or like drift boats there's some on Isla Mirada. They have them in Marathon. They have them in Key West. We worked on the one in Key West for a little while. And they'll take you out and you'll catch some snappers probably, and they'll fillet them for you, catch some grunts, and you'll have a good time. And then, of course, if you wanted to do something, there's the freshwater fishing side, which is definitely more affordable. We have Lake Okeechobee. We're like an hour drive to Florida, like an hour and a half, 2 hours to the Florida Keys, an hour to Lake Okeechobee. Like, we can pretty much, we're like 2 hours to the West Coast. We can go anywhere, but you have Lake Okeechobee, which has plenty of largemouth bass. We have Lake Ida, where you can catch peacock bass, clown knifefish. You can catch snakeheads. I mean, it's just insane what you can do. And then, of course, you go to the West Coast and you can do some triple tail, which we do have that pretty much everywhere, but it's really popular on the West Coast. You can catch the trout on the West Coast. The variety is insane. I mean, I just feel like I'm naming species like crazy.
Yeah. How fast do the fish come back when the guys are fishing in tournaments? If they find a rock pile on a point and they're cranking and they whack them and they haul them out of there, are there resident fish around them and they get back on the pile, or do they?
Absolutely, yeah. They're
fast, like tomorrow?
No, like hours. There are fish that will move. If you have something like that's drawing fish that well, it will happen with hours. Now, the fish that were physically removed,
no, I got that.
It depends on the release location.
So those guys in the tournaments, if they find a couple of spots that are just smoking hot, if they get 5 and get out of there,
yeah, I mean, as long
they'll
as
probably have 5 more plus what was there tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because it's the same thing. There's fish on the periphery who couldn't go in. They're not as angry or whatever.
Right. Most of the guys,
bullies left.
They find like a pattern that works, and they create a rotation. And they're looking for, when do those fish arrive? Can I be there at that time? And they run through their rotation. Now, the hard part is, whenever you talk about the top level pros, they all find the same stuff.
Right.
I mean, it is unbelievable, because on Major League Fishing, we have the GPS locations. I know where the fish are caught, and we can monitor their boats throughout the day, and they will hit the same areas. They're the best in the world, or the best in the world for a reason.
I like the game, and you can't fence them. You could build a bass pond. You could put a bunch of bait in it. You could put feeders on it to make the bait grow, and you could make your bass artificially get big, but you can't make them bite. And you can't, they're fenced sort of because they're in the lake, but like this afternoon, we're going to struggle because we just had high pressure go through.
Yep.
So the barometer's up and they're not going to behave. I don't think they're going to behave.
Yeah.
We're going to catch some, but not like yesterday. I got 15 yesterday and 2 6s or whatever. And I like the game. There's times when they get on some weird color. You got to figure them out. And then on the flip side, it can be so frustrating.
Yeah.
Especially on heavily pressured waters like I normally fish, where every ding-dong with a spinning rod and a whack of willy worms out there floating around in his kayak, throwing around. So they see a million lures.
Yeah.
But I just enjoy it. It's a good natural experience.
How about if I catch this little fish and I put it back because I want it to grow bigger?
It's not true.
Fish have no age-determined weight.
Okay.
Right? So it doesn't matter. I can look at a fish and be like, it's a little guy. and it's young and put it back, and in reality, that fish could be 10 years old. Fish grow through what's called indeterminate weight. So it's based solely on what they eat and how quickly they eat it. So just like we were talking about that exceptional fish and how many pounds it needs, they need, for largemouth, 10 pounds of forage to gain 1 pound. If they don't get that this year, but they eat enough maintenance weight, they'll stay that same size. Whenever we're talking about a fish that's 6 inches long, the maintenance weight is almost nothing. So it can just eat that same amount of forage and stay 6 inches its entire life. If it gets 10 pounds of forage that year, it's going to grow up to a different size. Now it needs that maintenance weight again, but to look at a fish and be like, it is small, therefore it is young, is not true.
My whole life is a lie. Everything I've ever learned is a lie.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Aptitude Outdoors podcast. If you're getting anything out of this, if you're learning something, if it's helped you in any way, go down in the link below and buy me a coffee. Throw me $1, throw me $2. We greatly appreciate it. Just using it to keep this ship afloat. So thank you very much.